Okay, so in this video, I will talk you through and demonstrate how to go about planning and writing an answer to an IELTS Task 1 question when the information you're given by the examiner is in the form of a process diagram. So before we start, let's just remind ourselves what's in IELTS Task 1. You need to write at least 150 words. Realistically, you want to be aiming to finish somewhere between 150 and 200 words. You're given 20 minutes to do this. Now, what do you need to do? You're going to be given some information, either data in the form of a line graph, bar chart, pie chart, table, or a combination of those, or in the form of a map or a pair of maps, or in the case of this video, a diagram describing a process. Now you need to take that information and summarize it by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Now this sentence is really important because it's the sentence which appears in every IELTS Task 1 question. Whatever information they give you, whether it's line graphs, pie charts, or other data style questions, or a different non-data style question like in this video, you need to find a way to select the main features from this, and you need to select main features in a way that allows you to recognize the connections between your features, not simply listing stage after stage after stage after stage after stage. Particularly if the process you're given is a linear process, a number of steps starting at one point and ending at another point. How do you identify what the main features are in that? How do you recognize connections between the main features? How do you make comparisons? It can be difficult when you're given a process diagram to not fall into the trap of simply listing step after step after step after step. So I'm going to show you a process of planning where I am looking to try and identify key features by grouping all of the data I'm given, all of the information I'm given, into different parts. Now I'm always trying to look for 3 parts because this is a useful way, particularly if 2 of your parts can be related to each other. That's because when I come to doing my writing, I will write 3 paragraphs in total. 1 paragraph will be an introduction, and these 3 features or these 3 parts that I'm identifying, I'm going to write about over 2 main body paragraphs. Now, because of that, I'm going to need to decide which 2 of my main features I'm going to report together, and that is how I'm showing recognition of the connections between my features, not simply listing them. That's how I am making comparisons in this case. I'm also looking for an overview in my planning stage, and that's really important because the examiners stipulate they need to see an overview. Again, in a process diagram, this can be difficult to identify. So I'll show you in 2 different process diagrams how I break the data down into 3 main features, 2 of them related to each other, and how I find an overview. I'll then take one of those plans and demonstrate how you put that data into an IELTS Task 1 writing response. As I mentioned, it will have 3 paragraphs, which will be an introduction and 2 main body paragraphs containing my 3 main features. I'm trying to show you a system where first I describe the trend and then I use data to support the trend. This is to avoid overloading information into sentences which are really important for structuring your response. So if we get into the habit of first describing what we can see and then using data or information or detail to support that, that's going to get you more points for cohesion and coherence. Final thing to say, in this demonstration and in all the demonstrations you see in these videos, I'm not going to write a conclusion. That's because you do not need a conclusion for IELTS Task 1 writing. You do need an overview, and sometimes people like to put their overview at the end because it gives a nice feeling of summarizing or finishing up. And that's absolutely fine if you want to do that, but you don't have to. I always advise putting the overview at the beginning, because if you don't complete an overview within that 20 minutes, and you run out of time, you're going to be penalized for not having an overview. So if you put your overview there at the beginning, even if you run out of time to talk about one of your features, you're not going to lose so many points. Okay, let's look at some examples and see how we plan this IELTS Task 1 processes question. Okay, so you'll see I've got two examples here of IELTS process questions. The first is about the manufacture of bricks, and the second is about the manufacture of cement and concrete. Okay, let's start with the first one, which is basically a linear process, right? Now, what I mean by that is it starts at one point, it has a number of steps, most of which happen sequentially, one after the other, and ends with a final point. There is a break here in the middle step where two things are happening simultaneously, two different forms of molding, but everything else just happens one thing after another. So as I mentioned, where lots of students are going to lose marks in their answers to this is they're simply going to write about step after step after step after step. It's very difficult to say which of these steps is more important than the other, because if you miss any of them, the final product isn't going to come out. So how do you select and report main features and make comparisons where you're simply given a process with a number of steps like this? Well, the answer to that is to look for phases within the process. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say this is 5, 6, 7 steps. We might say these are 3 sub-steps. So there are between 7 and 10 steps in this process. But what else can I say to group these steps together? How can I divide this 7 to 10 step process into ideally 3 phases of development? Now, I said ideally 3 because processes, we can be a bit looser with this. Sometimes a process really only obviously has 2 main parts to it, or maybe more than 3 main parts to it. But what you want to do is try to group those steps together into different phases. And here I think you can put it into 3 main phases. If your process is a manufacturing process, one good way of looking at it is thinking about the form your product takes at different stages. So, for example, here, up until the molding stage, we're dealing with real raw materials here, right? Clay, sand and water. Beyond that, we have a process of shaping and forming and producing the bricks. So that can be a second phase. And finally, packaging and delivery is a third phase. So step 1, raw materials. Step 2, the manufacturing process, if you like. And step 3, delivery to their final destination. If I was going to divide the data this way, I would probably talk about steps 1 and 2 together. They are mechanical processes, if you like, whereas step 3 is more of a commercial process, packaging and delivery. So in this case, my overview is going to say, overall, there are between 7 and 10 steps in this process, which takes place over 3 main phases. I might also mention in my overview what those phases are. Overall, we can see that the process contains between 7 and 10 steps, which take place over 3 phases of sourcing raw materials, manufacturing bricks, and packaging and delivery. Another way to talk about an overview with a process, which is quite popular, is to mention the first and last steps. So overall, we can see there are between 7 and 10 steps in this process, which take place over 3 phases, beginning with sourcing raw materials and ending with delivery to final destination, for example. So in this case, my overview is going to say, Overall, there are 7 steps which take place over 3 phases, beginning with sourcing raw materials and ending with delivery to building sites for use in the construction industry. My step 1 is sourcing and processing raw materials. My phase 2 is manufacturing the bricks themselves. My phase 3 is packaging and delivery, and I'm going to talk about stages 1 and 2, or phases 1 and 2 together in the same paragraph, with a final shorter paragraph talking about packaging and delivery. So that's my linear process. What if things are a bit more complicated, as they often are? If we look at example B, it's quite easy to divide the process into 2 parts, right? But then again, we are overlooking a really important fact, that there is a major connection between the 2 items of data. And that is the fact that cement, which is the product of the first table, is one of the materials used in the production of the second. So although we have 2 production processes here, and we do need to talk about both of these, in fact, the second picture simply states one use of the final product of the first picture. So this is a bit unusual, because the initial part is a linear process. We have a first step of crushing, second step of mixing, then they're heated and rotated, then ground and then put into bags. This is a linear sequence of steps to take raw materials and produce a product. But alongside that, we have another process, which is simply one step, right? This process is the mixing of ingredients in a concrete mixer. So how am I going to divide all of this information into 3 main parts? Well, for me, the obvious way to do it is to make concrete production one feature on its own, and then divide cement production into 2 main features. To divide this part into 2 main features, I'm going to divide it where the chemical change takes place after these limestone and clay are mixed. Once they are heated, they become cement, in my view. So everything up until the heating stage is dealing with the raw materials. Everything after the heating stage is dealing with cement itself. So my overview is the production of cement takes place over 4 steps, and this product can be mixed with others in a final step to produce concrete. My first feature is raw materials for cement. My second feature is processing cement. And my third feature is using cement to make concrete. So of my 3 main features, the first is the sourcing and processing of raw materials for making cement. The second is processing the cement that is produced. And the third is using this cement in the production of a new product, concrete. So once you've identified a clear overview and you've decided how you're going to group your steps into different phases in this way, you're ready to start writing. Okay, so here's my IELTS Task 1 process diagram question. And I've marked it up with the 3 main features I've identified and made a note of my overview. Let's just read through the questions. The diagrams below show the stages and equipment used in the cement making process and how cement is used to produce concrete for building purposes. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, Sentence 1 is an introductory sentence. That's not the same as an overview. An overview says what we can see in the data as a general trend. The introductory sentence simply tells us what the data is. And this is our opportunity to paraphrase the question that we're given and show the most advanced language we have. So they say the diagrams show stages and equipment, cement making, how cement is used to produce concrete for building purposes. That's quite nice. So my first sentence needs to say something like this, but in my own words. Okay, let's start by saying the diagrams illustrate. It doesn't really matter what data they give you. If they use the verb show in their question, you use the word illustrate. If they use the word illustrate, use the word show. Those are the only two words you really need for an IELTS task 1. You may see examples where people say the charts demonstrate, or the charts extrapolate, or other more advanced words, or the line graphs delineate, for example, but they don't usually work, and they're often more confusing and more distracting. Actually, in most cases, that's going to distract from the quality of your writing rather than improve it. So show or illustrate. They said show, so I'm going to say illustrate. The diagrams illustrate stages and equipment used in cement making. Well, how cement is produced and its subsequent use in the production of concrete. They say building purposes. I'm going to say for the construction industry. Let's note there that we haven't tried to paraphrase words like concrete or cement. Those are proper nouns, and those are the only words to use in that situation. But we can paraphrase things like for building purposes or making, for example. So where they said show, I said illustrate. Where they said stages and equipment used in cement making, I said how it is produced. Where they said how cement is used to produce concrete for building purposes, its use in the production of concrete for the construction industry. So, introductory sentence, paraphrase the question, say what the data is. Next sentence, overview. Overall, we can see that there are 4 main steps in the production of concrete, which can be mixed with other materials to produce cement. That should be the other way around, sorry. 4 main steps in the production of cement. This is why I'm an English teacher, not a builder. Can be mixed with other materials to produce concrete in a final step. Okay, so I've got my introduction, I've got my overview. I can now move on to talk about my main body. The production of cement can be divided the production of cement can be divided into 2 main phases. Treatment of raw materials and processing of newly produced initially. limestone and clay are crushed into a powder between two heavy rollers. This powder, let's say this. Next, this powder passes through mixer before being heated in a rotating heater. The subsequent powder is then ground again before being packaged into bags until it is ready to use. Packaged into bags where it can be stored until it is ready to use. When concrete is needed, this cement is mixed with water, sand and gravel, at a ratio of 15%, 10%, 25%, and 50%. These ingredients are rotated in the mixer until they are ready to be used for construction. Okay, let's do a word count here. It's 159 words, so I'm not going to be penalised, but for me, that feels a little too short, and I would be more comfortable knowing that I was slightly closer to the 200 mark than risk losing marks for being under 150 words. So where else can you say more in an IELTS Task 1 answer to make sure that you stay well over the word count? Well, you could look back at your overview and add first and last stages, for example. In my overview, I mentioned the production of cement had 4 steps. I might mention on top of that, in the production of cement, beginning with treatment, no, hang on, I said treatment already. Beginning with processing raw materials and ending with cement being stored in bags for production. Other places where you might be able to say more is in the sentences which introduce each paragraph. Here I've said when concrete is needed, this cement is mixed with water, sand and gravel. I've gone straight into data there. I've given numbers. it might be better to first describe a step and then add data to that in another sentence. So, for example, to produce concrete, it must be mixed with a number of other materials at precise ratios. When it is needed, this cement, when it is needed to produce concrete, the cement must be mixed with a number of other materials at precise ratios. When it is needed, cement when this is needed, cement is mixed with water, sand, and gravel at a ratio, respectively. These ingredients are rotated in a mixer until they are ready to be used for construction. So you can see now my word count is much closer to the 200. I'm much more comfortable that I'm not losing out. So for your purposes there, keep an eye on your word count. And if you are finding, particularly with processes, that your answer is getting quite short, areas that you can say more are in your overview and in the main body. When you are describing a phase in this process, first explain what the phase is and then go into more detail supporting that. That's how you can get your word count up to a higher amount. Okay, finally, let's proofread and make sure that we're not making any mistakes. The diagrams illustrate how cement is produced and its subsequent use in the production of concrete for the construction industry. Overall, when this is needed, cement is mixed with water, sand, and gravel at a ratio of 15, 10, 25, and 50% respectively. These ingredients are rotated in the mixer until they are ready to be used for construction. Okay, so in terms of our task achievement and our cohesion and coherence, we have summarized the data by selecting and reporting main features. We've made comparisons and connections between the features. We have an overview, so we're happy there. What else is it about this that is gaining me points in terms of language that I'm using? Well, there are two major language points that you want when you are describing processes. And you may have noticed what these are already. The first of them is using the passive voice. Let's have a look at the examples of the passive voice here. Cement is produced. Cement being stored in bags. Be mixed. Be divided or can be divided. Are crushed. Being heated. Being packaged. Be stored. Be mixed. Is needed. Is mixed. Are rotated. Are ready. So you can see I've got loads of examples of the passive voice here. I'm using the present simple passive, but I've also got different grammar structures. For example, with modal verbs, can be divided, or in the ing form, cement being stored in bags for production. So you can't really use different tenses here, but if you can show off different ways to use the passive voice, then that's going to earn you points. Now, the other language, which is very specific to processes like this, is the use of sequences, which are words which signify when you're moving between steps. Have a look. Then. Initially is a good one. Next. Before. Subsequent. Again. Until. When. Okay, until again there. So you can see I'm using sequencing language, which is giving the reader, which is really clearly signifying to the reader when I'm moving between these different steps and the connections between the different steps, and the connections from one step to another. So other words you might use: subsequently, next, after that, initially, firstly, secondly, thirdly. All of that sequencing language is really, really important for you to include in your own process descriptions. So let's remember the general process that we use for IELTS Task 1s is trying to break down that data, trying to group that data into different parts, and a good number is 3. 3 different parts if you can, 2 of them related to each other. That's a good way of doing it. Specific things you need to remember for processes are: be careful about your answer being too short and make sure you write enough in your overview and in the sentences introducing your main body paragraphs to fill out your answer well enough. And in terms of language, you need to show off everything you can do with the passive voice, probably the present simple passive, and you need to use really good sequences to show divisions between the different steps of your process. Okay, so have a go yourselves. Take a look at the PDFs and self-study materials by following the links in the video description for a deeper understanding of how to write IELTS Task 1s like this. If you have any questions, post them in the comments. If you find this video useful, don't forget to subscribe for more IELTS uploads.